She accused him of theft because of his red MAGA hat, confident in her righteousness. But when the police found out who he was, everything turned upside down. On a Saturday morning, in a cozy suburban supermarket in Dakota, the atmosphere was lively yet relaxed. Young parents with children were picking out snacks, elderly couples debated the prices of milk, and uniformed employees quietly arranged fresh fruit. Near the bakery section, standing by neatly displayed pretzels, was Karen. A middle-aged woman with a short, meticulously styled blonde haircut, heavy gold earrings, and perpetually pursed lips, she surveyed the surroundings with the air of someone who had found a reason to be displeased. Her gaze settled on a man casually making his way toward her. Jim was the picture of calm confidence, tall, sturdily built, around 40, with a light stubble. He wore a white t-shirt, simple blue jeans, and a red cap emblazoned with the white letters, "Make America Great Again." In one hand, he held a small shopping basket containing a pack of cookies, a jar of peanut butter, and a couple of soda bottles. Karen froze, like a predator spotting its prey. Her lips curled into a crooked smirk, and she loudly proclaimed for everyone around to hear, "Unbelievable! In this day and age, people still have the audacity to wear such disgusting symbols." Several shoppers stopped, pretending to examine the bread section, but their eyes betrayed their curiosity. Jim glanced briefly at her and continued toward the beverage aisle, his pace unhurried. Frustrated by his lack of response, Karen decisively pushed her cart and followed him. Her voice grew louder. "This is shameful. Do you think wearing that hat makes you a patriot? No, sir. It makes you look like someone ruining our country." Jim stopped by the milk cooler, calmly picked up a bottle, and placed it in his basket. He turned to Karen, slowly removed his cap as if to inspect it, and said with a faint smile, "You don't like my hat? Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion, though you could express it a little more politely, don't you think?" Karen's face reddened, but she wasn't backing down. Her voice grew even louder, now addressing not just Jim, but the entire vicinity. "See this? Typical behavior. They think they can dominate us. People like this are a threat to our future." By now, the small crowd openly watched the scene unfold. A young man in a nearby aisle whispered to his friend, "Oh, this is going to be good. I need to record this." Jim, casting Karen a calm glance, headed toward the checkout counter as if her outrage had nothing to do with him. But Karen wasn't giving up. She stopped a few feet from him and continued, "You think you can just ignore people? That's not democratic. Your hat is a disgrace to this country." Her rant drew the attention of the cashier, a young woman with a nose piercing, who exchanged a knowing look with Jim. As Jim placed his basket on the conveyor belt, he turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, do you always start shouting when you see someone's hat, or is today a special occasion?" The crowd burst into laughter, but Karen ignored the chuckles. She began rummaging through her purse with an expression of fierce determination, and suddenly shouted, "You know what? I suspect you're a thief. Yes, I saw you put something in your pocket when you grabbed the cookies." The crowd gasped. Jim raised an eyebrow in surprise, and the cashier froze, holding his bottle of milk. Jim sighed, placed his basket back on the counter, and calmly said, "Well, this is going to be an interesting day." The scene ended with laughter and murmurs from the crowd, but it was clear Karen had only just begun her tirade. Energized by the attention of onlookers, Karen approached Jim with the determination of someone preparing for a historic debate. She stopped a step away from him, hands on her hips. Her face was bright red, and her eyes glinted with fury. "Do you know that your hat symbolizes hate?" she declared with the conviction of someone revealing humanity's greatest secret. Jim, standing by the cookie shelf, didn't immediately turn. He picked up another pack, carefully examined its ingredients, and only then raised an eyebrow at Karen. "Ma'am, he said with impeccable calm. "I'm just buying groceries. Your opinion doesn't interest me." Karen had clearly expected a different reaction, outrage, excuses, something. But instead, her words bounced off Jim like a ball against a brick wall. Her face twisted in indignation, and she raised her voice. "Not interested? Of course you're not. Because people like you don't respect others. I'm telling you to take off that hat so it doesn't offend anyone around here." "Cookies offend people?" Jim asked calmly, nodding toward his basket. The crowd, which had grown larger, stifled laughter. Someone started recording the scene on their phone, sensing it might go viral. Karen clenched her fists. She scanned the onlookers as if seeking support, but saw that no one was rushing to her side. Her eyes darted to Jim's basket, landing on the pack of chocolate cookies. "I saw it," she suddenly exclaimed, pointing a finger at his basket. "He stole those cookies. I saw him put one pack in his pocket." Jim smirked incredulously. "The cookies are in my basket, ma'am. Stop imagining things." But Karen wasn't deterred. "Don't lie. You put one pack in your pocket and another in your basket to cover up the theft." Shoppers began whispering among themselves. A young store employee, a nervous-looking guy with a name tag reading Mike, approached. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, hesitantly, glancing between Karen and Jim. "No, it's not okay," Karen exclaimed, dramatically pointing at Jim like a judge sentencing a criminal. "He stole cookies. I demand you call the police." Jim sighed, placed his basket on the nearest shelf, and pulled a receipt from his back pocket. "Here's your stolen item, ma'am," he said calmly, handing the document to Mike. "I paid for it at the self-checkout before grabbing the milk." Mike glanced at the receipt with relief, but Karen wasn't ready to admit defeat. She nearly shouted, "He did it before going to the checkout. I saw it. This is fraud." The employee hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. The crowd murmured, showing an increasing interest in the unfolding drama. Someone remarked, "She's really reaching now," but Karen ignored the comment. Mike looked nervously at Jim and then at Karen, mumbling, "Maybe we should call the police to clear this up." "Excellent idea," Karen declared triumphantly, throwing her hands up. "Justice will finally prevail." The crowd buzzed with excitement, and one of the young men recording the scene sarcastically commented, "Never thought a cookie run could be so thrilling." Jim, noticing the tension escalating, raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "If it'll help everyone feel better, let's call the police," he said calmly, with a faintly amused smile. The employee nodded and pulled out his phone. Karen stood with the air of someone who had just won a great battle. But Jim remained as composed as he had been from the start, while the crowd eagerly awaited the arrival of the police to see how the story would unfold. The chapter ended with a tense atmosphere, a curious crowd, and Karen's relentless determination to see her justice served. Karen, feeling triumphant, almost sprinted toward the store entrance just as two police officers walked in. Both men, broad-shouldered and in their early 30s with crisp, perfectly pressed uniforms, scanned the scene with professional calm. Karen immediately raised her hand to point at Jim, nearly shouting, "That's him! That man stole cookies! They're in his pocket! He didn't even pay for them!" Her voice rang out so loudly it seemed to vibrate through the glass displays. The officers exchanged a brief glance, maintaining their composure, and approached Jim, who stood calmly by the checkout, leaning casually against his shopping cart. The senior officer addressed him. "Sir, we've received a complaint. Can you explain what's going on here?" Remaining perfectly composed, Jim slowly reached into his back pocket and pulled out a wallet. Opening it, he extracted an ID badge that bore large letters reading, "County Sheriff." Handing it to the officer, he said with a slight smile, "Jim Keller, Sheriff of this county. "Thanks for coming, officers, but it seems there's been a misunderstanding." The officers froze momentarily, examining the badge. One of them nodded, returned the ID, and glanced at Karen. "Sheriff Keller, it's a pleasure to meet you. Sorry for the inconvenience." The crowd, which had been quietly observing, collectively gasped. A teenage boy recording the scene on his phone whispered, "This is epic. She messed with the sheriff." Karen stood frozen in place. Her face went pale, then bright red, as though she had just realized the magnitude of her blunder. Her eyes widened as she stared at Jim. "What? You're the sheriff? This must be a mistake," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Jim calmly placed his cap back on his head, meeting Karen's gaze directly. "Yes, ma'am, I'm the sheriff, and believe me, I pay for my groceries just like everyone else." The crowd erupted in laughter and cheers. The cashier, who had been quietly observing the chaos, suddenly spoke up loudly. "Well, that's a plot twist. Maybe you should apologize to the sheriff, ma'am." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but only managed to stammer incoherently. One of the officers turned to her and asked in a measured tone, "Ma'am, are you sure you want to continue accusing the county sheriff of theft?" That question seemed to break her completely. Her hands trembled, and she barely managed to whisper, I must have made a mistake." Jim, still as composed as ever, picked up his basket of groceries and walked toward the exit. Before leaving, he turned back to Karen and said, "In the future, ma'am, don't judge people by their hats, and maybe stop looking for problems where there aren't any." The crowd burst into applause. Karen stood there with her head down, her pride utterly shattered, her face burning with embarrassment. One of the teens filming the event yelled, "This moment's going viral. Karen versus the sheriff." The crowd laughed even louder. Karen turned and practically ran out of the store, leaving everyone in high spirits with a story they wouldn't soon forget. The senior officer cast an appraising glance at Karen. Crossing his arms, he adopted a noticeably sterner tone. "Ma'am, do you have any evidence that Mr. Keller actually stole cookies?" Karen, who moments ago had been brimming with confidence, suddenly faltered. She stammered, glancing nervously around as though hoping someone in the crowd would come to her defense. "Well, I was sure. I saw him take the cookies." "You saw or you thought you saw?" the officer asked, his voice tinged with a mild sarcasm as he tilted his head. Karen tried to respond, but her words grew fainter with each syllable. "I maybe made a mistake." The crowd behind her erupted in laughter. Someone shouted, "What a twist! Looks like someone's in trouble." "Ma'am," the officer continued in a firm tone, "are you aware that falsely accusing someone of theft is a serious matter, especially when the person you're accusing is the county sheriff?" Karen turned an even paler shade. She stood like a schoolchild caught in a lie, avoiding eye contact. Behind her, one of the teens filming chimed in. "Wow, this is definitely blowing up on TikTok. Karen at her finest." Jim, who had remained silent throughout, simply shook his head, as if pitying Karen. Finally, he addressed the officer. "Sergeant, I think we can skip the formalities. Let's just hope the lady is more cautious with her accusations next time." The officer nodded, while Karen tried to hide behind a shopping cart to avoid further humiliation. But the teen's camera continued to capture her every move. The crowd began to disperse, though not without murmurs and quiet laughter. Jim moved to the checkout to complete his purchase, but paused near the door as one shopper clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Sir, you're a legend." Jim smiled and left the store to cheers and applause. At the door, he turned back to Karen, still lingering awkwardly nearby, and said with a faint smile, "Don't judge a man by his hat, judge him by his actions." The crowd roared with laughter and applause. Even the cashier, who had tried to remain neutral, couldn't suppress a grin. Outside, Jim removed his hat, wiped his brow, and muttered under his breath, "What a day, all this for a pack of cookies." Hours later, the video of Karen loudly accusing the sheriff of theft went viral, racking up thousands of views on social media. The comments were ruthless. Classic Karen strikes again. This sheriff is a national treasure. Step 1, think. Step 2, don't accuse without proof, Karen. Karen had unwittingly become the center of attention, but not in the way she had hoped. Meanwhile, Jim returned home, enjoying his well-earned cookies and leaving behind a story that would be told in Dakota for years to come.